Hi, this is Dr. C. We're going to start a little series now on vital signs. What do the doctors need to check every time they see you? Right now, the very first thing that we want to talk about is temperature. Hot and cold. Obviously, the temperature always gets checked, or at least should be checked. But is it that important to check it, say, for example, for COVID? Well, we're going to talk about all that type of thing. As you know, hot and cold, we use it all the time, hot and cold. Cold is bad, hot is good. Not hot necessarily is good. Cold isn't necessarily as bad. If you're on a slab, you're cold. If you're out working and all, you're hot. So who knows? Let's talk about temperature. Do you know when the normal, quotes, normal temperature was ever established? And it's in all of the textbooks and all for medical students to learn, to doctors to learn, nurses to learn. 98.6, 37 degrees centigrade. Why is that important? It's important because a lot of the little enzyme reactions that happen in your body normally happen best at a temperature of around 37 degrees centigrade. So that was accepted. That 98.6 came about as a result of checking, roughly about 28,000 people back in 1851. Now, I couldn't find any original article on that. I'm sure if I really looked, I could have found it to see what the ages of the people were that they checked. Regardless, subsequently, that's been rechecked with many, many thousands of people. It appears that the normal temperature, 98.6, now has gone down roughly 1.2, 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So instead of 98.6, it's probably 97.3. Of course, temperature varies all the time. It varies first thing when you get up, when you're out working, at night. All these things, it's a diurnal variation usually. Usually it's the lowest first thing right around 4 or 5 in the morning when you're asleep, and normally goes up, usually peaks around noontime, then slowly comes down again. So you get a little variation during the course of the day. It also can go up when you exercise. It can go up with a variety of different activities that you do. So that kind of a mean normal temperature is what we start at anyway. You have to start somewhere. So let's start with that as a normal. Okay. Now, how do we measure temperature? Well, back in my day, back when we were checking temperatures and all, we had a little thermometer. Little thread of mercury in that thermometer. So one way of checking it is by displacing a liquid up a little column. And normally you have it calibrated so that as far up as the mercury may go, that'll be your temperature. And so there were two types of little thermometers that were available. One thermometer had a long reservoir at the tip. The other one had a short reservoir at the tip. Never mix the two up because the long reservoir was for oral, under your tongue, and the short one was for rectal temperatures. Don't want to mix those two up. Don't want to mix them up. So after that, there were a variety of different ways to check using liquid displacement. They used different colored fluids, for example. You had to have some kind of a color to it so that you could easily see it. And they used usually a red color that goes up. But that would be calibrated and you could follow it up and get that temperature. They use that mostly for external, outdoor thermometers. So besides displacement of liquid, what other ways can we check it out? Well, we could also check it out using, how about the back of the hand? Usually when my mother or whoever was with me, when we were kids, when you say, I don't feel good now, what they do is touch you with the back of the hand on your forehead. How accurate is that? Well, roughly, they've done some studies, believe it or not. Somebody got a paper out of the damn thing. Usually about 58% accurate. So, well, better than 50-50, right? So, back of the hand. That's another way of checking it out. Nowadays, mostly we use the infrared temperature checks. There are several different types of infrared. The first one that became available just used a scan of the forehead and the ear canal as well. So, okay, that's okay. So those two ways of checking. How does that work? How does that infrared thermometer work? Well, you got to understand, and you got to think about it a little bit, but you got to look at what they call black box radiation. In other words, our temperature is also related to a lot of the little tiny molecules, the little atoms that we're made of. And there's a certain motion to them all the time. As the temperature rises, the motion of these little molecules increases a little. And it gives off, believe it or not, it gives off infrared radiation. So, in other words, if you're walking around and they put this device to check it, they can actually visualize the infrared radiation coming off you depending on your temperature. So that's interesting. So if they then, with their instrument, through the lens of the instrument, have that infrared directed to what they call a thermopile, which absorbs that infrared and converts it to heat. Then the heat is converted to electricity, and that little electric current goes to a detector, which then gives you the temperature reading. That can be very, very quick, usually in seconds. Just flash it, bang, you get it. Now they're using the infrared, not just with ear canal and forehead. Now they have other instruments as well. And of course, as you go up in technology, you go up in price too. So if you have one of the ones now that are used to check you for COVID, for example, it doesn't check you for COVID. It simply checks your temperature. And if your temperature happens to be over 100.3, I believe is what they use, yep, you're out. You can't do anything. So, doesn't tell them that you got COVID. Probably don't. But you're not going to get admitted if you have a little fever. So, okay, that's the way it is. But that just measures 1 point. In other words, that lens focuses on 1 point. A lot of people just use the forehead. But the most accurate spot on the face is actually called the inner canthus of the eye. The inner canthus of the eye. That's where you should be focusing for the facial temperature. But it's not bad to look at the forehead. I mean, it's going to be close. But it gives you a skin temperature. That doesn't mean that's the temperature inside your body. That's called a core temperature. Now, we'll talk more about core temperature when we talk about some of the pathology here. But that's a single point. Now, you've also heard of thermal cameras. Thermal cameras. What those thermal cameras do is they have the ability then, with multiple lenses, to check multiple areas on the face. Multiple areas. And then with a little computer, they put it all together, take the average of all of these little spots. There could be thousands of different spots depending on the number of lenses that you have, and they can scan people coming into work, for example. Now, the other big advantage to that too, besides being able to scan multiple points on somebody's face, you can also, with that technology, you can be at a distance. Now, those who take that single measurement have to be fairly close. Now, not up against it, but fairly close. Whereas the thermal camera can take you at a little bit of a distance, and they're pretty accurate. So we've gone quite a ways now with that. Nowadays, you can even get that thermal camera to convert the degree of temperature elevation to a color. The hottest color, of course, being red. So not only do you have a picture of the face with all of the spots that are, the lens is checking, but also it's color coordinated. So you may get a little red here, a little green somewhere else, whatever. So they're getting much, much better at this all the time. Okay, that's how we check the temperatures. Now, what happens when you don't get a normal temperature? Well, obviously it can be too high or too low. Let's talk about too low first. Hypothermia, if you're too low. Now, what's the definition? Well, by number, it would be under 95 degrees Fahrenheit. 95, just by definition. Now, that is only stage 1, a mild hypothermia. Between 90 and 95 is a mild hypothermia. You're cold. What does the body do when you get a little cold? Well, the body has a very unique mechanism. If you're cold, and they register that on the surface of your skin, message goes to a place called the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. That's where the temperature sensing area is in the brain. The hypothalamus, in turn, then, can turn on some things in the body to try to get the temperature back up again. The two ways it does that: constricting the blood vessels that go to the skin so you're not losing any more heat, and you shiver. Now, to shiver, you use your muscles. And when you actively use your muscles, you create a little bit of heat as well. So diminish the loss, increase the heat capacity. So when you go through that phase of mild hypothermia, you're going to have pale skin because you cut down the blood supply, and you're going to shiver. Okay. Next stage, moderate stage, between 82 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you go a little further with this further symptoms now, because now you've cut down considerably, not only the blood flow around the body, you cut down on the activities of all the organs as well. That includes the heart. Heart rate will start coming down. Blood pressure start coming down. You begin to get confused because it cut down the flow to the brain. So in other words, all of the different organs now are cutting down between that 82 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. A severe hypothermia would be under 82 degrees Fahrenheit. What happens then? Well, every year, I don't think it goes without saying, every year we find a newspaper article that somebody who was hypothermic was brought in to the undertaker. The undertaker throws him on a slab, puts him in a room. The room is a little warmer. Patient gets a little higher temperature, and the heart starts beating again. In other words, under 82, you may not feel a pulse. You may not be able to hear the heartbeat, and you usually lose consciousness. So, every year, people who have severe hypothermia wake up at the funeral home. Scare the crap out of the funeral director, I'll tell you, but it happens all the time. When you see somebody with hypothermia, you want to warm them up, but you warm them up gradually. Take off any wet things because they're losing heat as well because the clothing is wet. And so all the wet stuff comes off, multiple blankets and all, try to warm them up gradually. Now you get somebody who has moderate or even severe hypothermia, you may have to do it a little more aggressively. And so they can actually even, like they do kidney dialysis, they can do a dialysis. They can either do blood dialysis or put that tube into your belly, peritoneal dialysis with warm fluids. So that's one way to try to get them to warm up a little faster. That's hypothermia. How about hyperthermia? High. Fever. Fever. What is a fever? Well, like I told you, we usually use as a rough guide 100.3. Now, why 100.3? Because at 100.4, that was basically defined as a low-grade fever. A moderate fever would be anything between 100.3 and 103. Over 103, and you are now the hyperthermic. So, depending on the course of the temperature elevation, there are many different types of elevations that we see. You may get somebody with a constant elevation. Constant. Usually that's due to a drug. Usually. You may get an intermittent one. Goes up, usually towards the end of the day, late afternoon. Temperature goes up. Comes back down to normal. Goes up again the next noon. That's an intermittent type of temperature elevation. You can also get a pattern of, besides that, you can get a thing called a remittent, not intermittent, but remittent fever. In other words, you go up and down and up and down. Never goes down to normal, though, not like the intermittent one. That usually is starting out with a shaking chill. It's usually due to an infection. That could be a bacterial infection, could be a viral infection, but some kind of an infection will cause that type of fever. Okay. We also recognize the fact that there are, quotes, relapsing fevers. You may not have it for a while and all of a sudden fever goes up. Good example of that would be sickle cell anemia. But there are some other relapsing fevers where things will be quiet for a while and then bang, you get it back again. Usually it's some disease process that causes that. Okay. We talked a little bit about the different stages of a fever. You get the first thing that you get is a prodrome. You just don't feel right. You're logy. You're tired. Get a little headache. In other words, that's the prodrome that something's going to happen soon. Then you get a chill. If you have a bacterial one or a viral one, you may get a chill. Now, there's some of the chills can really rock the bed, and they really get a chill if you get a bad infection. After that, you begin to get flushed. The blood vessels dilate up. And then, after you sweat, bang, back down again towards normal. So those are the different stages of a fever. Okay. Let's now talk about heat-related illnesses. Because, hey, we're in the middle of the summer. It's hot out. Very hot today, as a matter of fact. I had to get some water when I came in because you have to really you don't want to get dehydrated on top of everything. Heat-related illnesses. First of all, you can get what's called a heat rash. Heat rash. What causes a rash? Usually blockage of the sweat glands in your skin. It might present as little white dots, or maybe even little red dots. But nevertheless, that is a heat rash. Usually you see that more in kids. See it in kids. You may also get heat cramps. If you lose enough fluid and your electrolytes, the potassium especially, go down a little bit, you may get some cramps, heat cramps. And so that happens as well. You may get a bad sunburn, and there's different degrees of sunburn too. I've had them all. I loved the sun when I was a kid, so I got out. I probably spent a lot of time out in the woods and all, but I enjoyed the walking and going out, get mushrooms, get some blueberries, pick things. So that's the type of thing that I enjoy doing. So, but you can get the heat cramps if you are out too long. Usually it's the workers who get that type of thing. Next, heat exhaustion. That's the next stage. Now, you can get heat exhaustion with exercise, with work, with doing activities out when it's too hot. How do you treat heat exhaustion? How do you identify heat exhaustion? Well, first of all, you look at the person, they're very pale, they're terribly fatigued, dizzy, lightheaded, and lay them down, raise the legs up, get more fluid into the central part of the body, and you want to cool them off. So that's heat exhaustion. Obviously, you want to give them some fluids. Best fluid for heat exhaustion would be not just water alone, although water is still the best, But nowadays, we also have a lot of other types of waters that have sodium and potassium in it, and a little sugar. They like to put a little sugar in, make it a little sweeter. But you can get Gatorade. Gatorade has all those in it, a little sugar, sodium chloride, potassium chloride, all in the Gatorade. You're probably very aware that began with the athletic department down at the University of Florida many, many years ago, where instead of using water and salt tablets. Remember, they used to give out salt tablets to all of the athletes who were sweating like crazy in the summer or in the fall. They now use Gatorade as a substitute, which gives them all the things that they need, that they've lost with all the sweat. So the last part, besides the heat exhaustion now, is actually heat stroke. Now, normally you don't get heat stroke unless you've reached roughly about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. You reach 104 and above, you could get a heat stroke. Your pulse goes way up, you get short of breath, nausea, vomiting, dizzy, confused. You may even have seizures too. I've never seen anybody myself with a heat stroke, but apparently it does happen. So at any rate, who's at risk to get these types of heat problems? First of all, infants, and that's usually up to about age 4. The elderly, over age 65. If you are overweight. You know, weight is so important. You've probably read lately too that even with the COVID virus, obesity now is a major risk factor for developing complications of the COVID virus. And so obesity or overweight is a risk factor also for hyperthermia. Dementia. You don't realize that this is happening because it's not together. The synapses are not working up there. Dementia is a major factor, not just in elderly, but even in younger dementia patients as well. But you put the two together, elder and dementia, that's a significant risk factor for people to have problems with the heat. And so, those are the major factors, obviously outdoor workers as well, who don't have much choice, I guess, in what they do. The people who get dehydrated are mostly the elderly people because, number one, they've lost the ability to identify the fact that they have this problem. Their skin is thin now. It makes a big difference because they don't retain their water as well. So, dehydration in the elderly, you have a decrease in body fluid then. They don't understand their mechanisms to identify and treat it themselves has diminished considerably. And they may be on medications. They may be on a diuretic, which is drying them out anyway. And so the elderly are especially prone to getting dehydrated. I always tell, especially the elderly patients that I see in the nursing homes and all, drink plenty of water, drink plenty of liquids, because you don't identify it yourself as easily as you used to, and then all of a sudden it may just hit you. So make sure you talk to your parents, you talk to the people who really need to understand this, and tell them about the problem with dehydration as well. Again, just good old water. And remember, we've had talks on water. It can be bottled water, tap water, whatever. Okay, that is temperature. Next time we're going to talk quite a bit about blood pressure. And I want you to pay attention to the blood pressure. Remember, 66% of us have hypertension. You need to pay attention. We're going to do that next time. This is Dr. C. Thank you for watching.